November 1990. The chill of an approaching winter already gnawed at the edges of Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. For the close-knit Amish community of Bart Township, it was a time of quiet industry, of preparing for the colder months, a rhythm of life largely unchanged for generations. But on one crisp afternoon, that timeless rhythm was brutally shattered, replaced by a frantic, disbelieving scramble. Two young sisters, 12-year-old Sarah and 10-year-old Lizzie, had vanished. They had set out in their family's horse-drawn buggy, a familiar sight on the winding country roads, on what should have been a simple errand to visit their aunt. But the hours ticked by, the sun dipped below the horizon, and the distinctive clatter of hooves and buggy wheels never returned to the farm. Dread, cold and sharp, began to creep into the hearts of their parents, Jacob and Rebecca. This was not like their girls. This was not the Amish way. The buggy, a sturdy, practical vehicle, was their link to the outside world, a symbol of their journey. Now it was a ghost, and with it their daughters. The initial search was a desperate, communal effort, a beacon of unity in the face of unimaginable terror. Neighbors, friends, and family members fanned out across the fields and along the narrow roads, their lanterns casting dancing shadows against the encroaching darkness. Every ditch, every copse of trees, every abandoned barn was meticulously scoured. The silence of the night, usually a source of comfort, became a vast, oppressive canvas for their anxieties. The horse, an integral part of their daily lives, was also gone, adding another layer of unsettling mystery. Did the horse bolt? Was there an accident? Or, a far more sinister question that no one dared voice aloud, had someone taken them? The mind, in such moments of crisis, races through 1,000 permutations of disaster, each more chilling than the last. The Amish community, known for its self-reliance and its peaceful isolation, suddenly found itself grappling with a void that no amount of prayer or communal support seemed able to fill. The local authorities, initially hesitant to intervene in the private affairs of the Amish, were soon drawn into the escalating crisis. Sheriff Thompson, a seasoned lawman with a weathered face that had seen its share of local tragedies, arrived at the farm. The scene was one of quiet desperation. Rebecca, her face streaked with tears, clutched a worn handkerchief. Jacob, usually a man of immense strength and calm, stood pale and drawn, his eyes scanning the horizon as if he could conjure his daughters into existence through sheer force of will. The official search began with a methodical sweep of the immediate area. Patrol cars, their flashing lights a stark contrast to the quiet dignity of the Amish homestead, now lined the dusty lane. Helicopters, their rotors chopping at the night air, began to crisscross the skies, their powerful searchlights probing the darkness below. It was an unprecedented intrusion into the secluded world of the Amish, a testament to the severity of the situation. Every local radio station broadcast the news, interrupting their regular programming with urgent bulletins. Sarah, with her bright, inquisitive eyes and a penchant for storytelling, and Lizzie, quieter and more contemplative, known for her gentle demeanor and a small, handmade doll she carried everywhere. Descriptions were vivid, poignant. What were they wearing? What were their last known movements? The details were painstakingly gathered, each one a thread in a rapidly unraveling tapestry of normalcy. The initial hypothesis, the one everyone desperately hoped for, was a simple accident. Perhaps the horse had spooked, throwing the girls from the buggy. Perhaps they had wandered off into the dense woods, disoriented and frightened. But as the days bled into a week, and then into a second, those hopes began to wither. The vastness of the surrounding wilderness, beautiful and serene in daylight, became a terrifying maw at night, a place where two young girls could simply disappear without a trace. The chill deepened, bringing with it the harsh reality of exposure. If they were out there, alone, their chances of survival dwindled with every passing hour. The community remained resilient, fueled by an unwavering faith and an indomitable spirit of cooperation. Search parties continued their relentless efforts, expanding their radius far beyond the initial scope. Volunteers from neighboring towns, moved by the plight of the Amish family, joined the search, traversing fields and forests, calling out the girls' names until their voices were hoarse. Flyers with the girls' smiling faces, reproduced from their sparse family photographs, appeared in every diner, gas station, and general store within a 100-mile radius. The story, tragic and perplexing, began to capture national attention. Television news crews, their satellite trucks a jarring presence in the tranquil countryside, descended upon Bart Township, eager to cover the unfolding mystery. The image of the silent, stoic Amish parents, their grief palpable yet contained, resonated deeply with viewers across the country. The lack of any ransom demand, any note, any hint of foul play beyond the sheer absence of the girls, deepened the enigma. It was as if they had simply evaporated into thin air. The buggy, a key piece of evidence, seemed to have vanished with them. Without it, investigators had no starting point, no breadcrumbs to follow. The familiar roads, once a comfort, became a source of agonizing uncertainty. Where could a horse and buggy, even one moving at a brisk pace, disappear so completely? The questions mounted, each one heavier than the last, pressing down on the collective heart of Bart Township. The search continued, day after day, through the bitter cold of November, into the short, bleak days of December, and then, as hope faded like the last embers of a dying fire, into the new year. The snow fell, blanketing the fields in a pristine white, but beneath that beautiful, deceptive cover, the mystery of the vanished sisters remained, as dark and impenetrable as ever. 10 years later, the world had moved on, but for Jacob and Rebecca, and indeed for many in Bart Township, the calendar had simply stopped on that devastating November afternoon. The pain of loss, though dulled by time, remained a constant, throbbing ache. The girls' room, preserved as they had left it, was a shrine to what might have been a poignant reminder of their absence. Their small dresses still hung in the closet. Their handmade dolls sat silently on the bed, gathering dust. The community, while offering solace and unwavering support, had also learned to live with the unanswered questions, the silent burden of the unknown. Life, as it always does, continued. Babies were born, crops were harvested, seasons changed, but the shadow of Sarah and Lizzie's disappearance lingered, a permanent fixture in the landscape of their collective memory. Then, in the summer of 2000, a discovery was made that would rip open old wounds and unearth a truth far more horrifying than anyone had ever imagined. A team of geologists, conducting a routine survey in a remote, long-abandoned iron ore mine roughly 30 miles from Bart Township, stumbled upon a collapsed shaft, its entrance obscured by decades of overgrown foliage. These mines, remnants of a bygone industrial era, dotted the landscape of Pennsylvania, often forgotten, their dark depths holding untold secrets. What began as a geological curiosity quickly transformed into something far more chilling. As the team cautiously explored the newly accessible shaft, their powerful headlamps cutting through the oppressive darkness, they noticed something out of place. Deep within the mine, partially submerged in a stagnant pool of water, lay the unmistakable, decaying remains of a horse-drawn buggy. Its wooden frame was rotted, its wheels encrusted with rust and mud, but its distinctive silhouette was unmistakable. This was not just a buggy, it was the buggy, the one that had vanished with Sarah and Lizzie 10 long years ago. The air in the mine was thick with the stench of decay and the suffocating weight of history. The geologists, their faces pale with a mixture of fear and grim understanding, immediately alerted the authorities. The news spread like wildfire, a shockwave rippling through Lancaster County. Sheriff Thompson, now a decade older and grayer, felt a familiar knot of dread tightening in his stomach. The case that had haunted him for so long, the one he had reluctantly closed as a cold file, was now brutally reopened. The retrieval operation was meticulously planned and painstakingly executed. The mine shaft was unstable, the risks high. Specialized teams, including forensic experts and mining engineers, were brought in. It was a slow, arduous process, each step fraught with danger. The world watched, captivated once again by the unfolding drama, the promise of answers after a decade of agonizing silence. As the remains of the buggy were carefully brought to the surface, the details began to emerge, each one a fresh stab to the heart. The buggy was utterly dilapidated, a mere husk of its former self, yet it held its secrets with a grim tenacity. Inside, among the debris and sediment, forensic investigators discovered fragments of children's clothing, a small, faded blue bonnet, a piece of gingham fabric, and perhaps most heartbreaking of all, a tiny, rusted metal pendant, recognized by Jacob and Rebecca as belonging to Sarah. The presence of the pendant, a cherished item Sarah had always worn, confirmed beyond any doubt that this was indeed their daughter's buggy. The silence that followed this confirmation was deafening, a collective gasp of profound sorrow. The horse, too, was found, its skeletal remains still harnessed to the buggy, a testament to the sudden and catastrophic end it had met. The scene painted a horrifying picture. The horse, in a panicked struggle, had evidently been unable to escape the plummet into the mine. What caused this? An accident? A deliberate act? The initial hope, however faint, that the girls might still be alive, however remote, was extinguished in that moment. The discovery was not a joyous revelation of survival, but a grim confirmation of their worst fears. The mine, once a silent tomb, had finally yielded its secrets, but at a terrible price. The immediate conclusion, based on the physical evidence within the mine, pointed towards a tragic accident. The buggy, the horse, and the girls had seemingly plunged into the open shaft, the fall proving instantly fatal. The initial investigative reports suggested that the horse might have shied or lost its footing, perhaps on a poorly maintained section of the road or a hidden path leading to the mine. The sheer depth of the shaft, hundreds of feet straight down, offered little hope of survival from such a fall. The impact would have been catastrophic. For a brief, agonizing period, this narrative offered a grim kind of closure. It was a tragedy, yes, but one without human malice, an unforgiving act of nature or unfortunate circumstance. The community, while heartbroken, began to process this new, terrible truth. Funerals were held, a decade after the disappearance, offering a chance for collective mourning and a semblance of peace. The girls were finally laid to rest, their graves marked with simple, wooden markers side by side. The burden of the unknown, at least, had been lifted. But for Sheriff Thompson, a nagging doubt persisted. Something about the scene, about the way the buggy was positioned, about the sheer improbability of such a precise, accidental plunge into an obscured mine shaft, didn't quite sit right. His years of experience had taught him that sometimes the most obvious answer was not the true one. He had seen too many cases where simple accidents had hidden far darker truths. The forensic teams, meanwhile, continued their painstaking examination of the mine site and the recovered buggy. Every piece of debris, every fragment of cloth, every speck of rust was cataloged and analyzed. It was a slow, meticulous process, working backward from the grim reality of the present to the tragic events of a decade past. Among the wreckage of the buggy, a particular detail caught the eye of one of the junior investigators, a young, keen-eyed forensic technician named Maria Rodriguez. Tucked beneath a broken seat cushion, partially obscured by mud and sediment, she found a small, metallic object. It was heavily corroded, almost unrecognizable, but its distinct shape hinted at a deliberate design. With careful cleaning and magnification, its true nature became horrifyingly clear. It was an arrowhead, not a modern hunting arrow, but an ancient, flint-napped arrowhead, a relic from a bygone era, remarkably preserved despite its long submersion. Its presence was baffling. What was a crude, primitive weapon doing in the buggy of two Amish girls? It made no sense in the context of an accident. The discovery of the arrowhead immediately cast a long, dark shadow over the accidental fall theory. It introduced a new, disturbing element, a jarring piece of anachronistic evidence that screamed of human intervention. Sheriff Thompson, upon seeing the artifact, felt a chill that had nothing to do with the mine's damp air. This was no random object. It suggested a struggle, a conflict, something far more sinister than a simple mishap. The arrowhead became the linchpin, the single piece of evidence that irrevocably shifted the entire investigation from a tragic accident to a potential crime scene. The focus of the investigation abruptly pivoted. The mine was no longer just a tomb. It was a vast, silent crime scene. Every inch of its interior, every crack and crevice, was now scrutinized for further clues. The area around the mine entrance, previously examined only for signs of a buggy approach, was now re-examined with a fresh, more suspicious eye. The soil, the vegetation, the discarded items, everything was cataloged. What else had they missed? What other secrets did the earth hold? Investigators began to speculate. Had the girls been attacked near the mine entrance? Had they been forced into the buggy before it was pushed into the shaft? The questions multiplied, each more unsettling than the last. The arrowhead, once a mere curiosity, was now subjected to a battery of forensic tests. Could it yield DNA? Could it be linked to a specific person? The technology available in 2000 was far more advanced than what had been available in 1990, offering a glimmer of hope for answers that had been previously unattainable. The local historical society was consulted. Arrowheads of that specific type, they confirmed, were indeed found in the region, consistent with Native American artifacts from centuries past. But how did it get into the buggy? Was it an accidental relic picked up by the girls, or something far more deliberate? The implications were terrifying. The narrative of a simple accident began to crumble under the weight of this new evidence. The community, still reeling from the initial discovery of the buggy, found itself plunged back into a fresh wave of fear and uncertainty. The collective grief was now tinged with a raw, visceral anger. Who would do something so heinous to two innocent children? The tranquil facade of Bart Township, a place where such violence was almost unheard of, was shattered once more. Sheriff Thompson, reinvigorated by this new lead, redoubled his efforts. He called for a re-interview of anyone and everyone who had been questioned a decade earlier, and many who hadn't been. No detail was too small, no memory too insignificant. The cold case, now burning hot, demanded a renewed intensity, a fresh perspective. The search for answers now took on a different character. It was no longer a rescue mission, nor merely an investigation into an accident. It was a hunt for a perpetrator, a search for justice for Sarah and Lizzie. The ancient arrowhead, a silent witness from the past, held the key to unlocking a truth that had been buried for 10 long years, a truth that promised to be far more disturbing than anyone could have ever prepared for. The discovery of the arrowhead marked a chilling turning point, plunging the long-dormant investigation into a far darker realm. It rendered the narrative of a simple, tragic accident utterly implausible. An ancient flint artifact, a relic of a bygone era, nestled amidst the wreckage of a modern buggy, spoke not of a runaway horse, but of deliberate, violent human intervention. Sheriff Thompson, now driven by a renewed sense of purpose and a profound disquiet, ordered a comprehensive re-examination of all original case files, searching for any overlooked details, any inconsistencies that might have been dismissed in the initial rush to attribute the disappearance to an accident. The world of 1990 was a different one, less forensically sophisticated. What might have been considered irrelevant then could now be the critical piece of the puzzle. The mine shaft, once thought to be merely the girls' final resting place, was now meticulously treated as a crime scene, every inch of its dark, damp interior painstakingly analyzed for further evidence. Specialized teams descended into its depths, not just for recovery, but for detection. They used advanced lighting, ground-penetrating radar, and even remote-controlled cameras to search for anything that might have been missed in the initial, more urgent retrieval operation. The presence of the arrowhead immediately suggested a potential struggle. Had the girls been attacked and possibly subdued before being thrown or forced into the mine? Or had the buggy been deliberately pushed with them still inside? The latter scenario, grim as it was, seemed more plausible given the complete disappearance of the buggy. No one, not even the most seasoned investigators, could reconcile the arrowhead with an accidental plunge. It spoke of a deliberate, malicious act. The forensic analysis of the arrowhead itself became a priority. Modern DNA testing, even on such an ancient artifact, offered a slim hope of yielding genetic material, perhaps from a perpetrator's skin cells, or even blood residue if it had been used in a struggle. The passage of 10 years and the damp, corrosive environment of the mine made this a monumental challenge, but the scientific advancements of the new millennium offered possibilities unheard of a decade prior. The local community, initially relieved to have some form of closure, now found itself grappling with a far more insidious and terrifying reality. The fear of an unknown attacker, a predator lurking in their peaceful countryside, returned with a vengeance. The comforting narrative of a random, unfortunate event was replaced by the chilling specter of calculated evil. Parents held their children closer. Once familiar routes suddenly felt menacing, and the quiet trust that characterized Amish life was irrevocably shaken. Sheriff Thompson convened a new task force, bringing in state and federal resources. This was no longer a local matter. It was a complex criminal investigation with national implications. The question that gnawed at everyone was, who would commit such an act and why? The Amish, known for their pacifism and their deliberate separation from the outside world, rarely attracted such violence. Was it a random act, or was there a deeper, more personal motive? The reinvestigation began by meticulously reviewing the testimonies of everyone who had been interviewed during the initial search. Every friend, every neighbor, every transient worker who had passed through Bart Township in late 1990 was re-examined. Were there any individuals who had seemed suspicious at the time, but whose actions were dismissed because the prevailing theory was an accident? Any quarrels, any disputes, any strangers seen in the area? The minutiae of daily life, once considered mundane, now became potential clues. Old photographs, forgotten letters, and even school records were revisited, each offering a potential fragment of a forgotten narrative. The task force also broadened its scope to consider cold cases from other jurisdictions, particularly those involving missing persons or unexplained deaths from the same time period. Could there be a connection, a pattern of behavior from a traveling offender? The possibilities, however remote, had to be explored. The discovery of the arrowhead wasn't the only anomaly that began to surface during the renewed investigation. As the original police reports were meticulously reread, a subtle but significant detail emerged that had been largely overlooked a decade earlier. A witness, an elderly farmer who lived near the mine entrance, had reported seeing a black pickup truck parked suspiciously close to the mine on the afternoon the girls vanished. At the time, his testimony had been noted but not heavily pursued, as the focus was on finding the buggy and the girls in the surrounding fields, and the accident theory was gaining traction. Now, in the context of the arrowhead, the black pickup truck took on a profoundly menacing significance. It suggested a vehicle used for abduction or for transporting the victims to the mine. The farmer, now frail and his memory somewhat faded, was re-interviewed multiple times. He struggled to recall specifics, but his recollection of the truck, its dark color, and its unusual presence in such a remote area remained consistent. This was the first concrete lead to an actual perpetrator, a tangible link to a human agent, rather than just an abstract accident. The image of the black pickup truck, sitting silently on the desolate dirt road, became a chilling new focal point for the investigation. It opened up a new avenue of inquiry, the search for a specific vehicle, and by extension, a specific individual. The investigative net widened, reaching out to neighboring states and beyond. Police databases were scoured for similar black pickup trucks reported stolen or involved in other crimes around November 1990. Auto repair shops, tow truck operators, and even junkyards from the era were contacted, hoping to unearth a record, a forgotten detail, anything that could link a specific vehicle to the Bart Township area. The sheer passage of time, however, presented a formidable challenge. Records from a decade ago were often incomplete, poorly digitized, or simply lost to time. Yet, the determination of the task force was unyielding. They built a profile of the potential perpetrator, someone familiar with the remote landscape, someone who could operate without drawing immediate suspicion, someone with a capacity for extreme violence. The very act of pushing a buggy with two young girls inside down a mine shaft spoke of a chilling depravity. This wasn't a crime of passion. It seemed to be a calculated, almost ritualistic act of terror. The motive remained elusive, but the method was clear: to obliterate any trace, to make the victims disappear into the earth itself. The case was no longer just about the girls. It was about the dark heart of humanity and the relentless pursuit of those who committed unspeakable acts. The shadow of the mine and the secrets it had held for so long continued to deepen. As the reinvestigation gained momentum, the focus intensified on the local populace. The black pickup truck, however elusive, hinted at someone with at least a passing familiarity with the region. Someone who knew about the abandoned mine, its hidden entrance, and the remote access roads. The initial interviews from 1990, painstakingly reviewed, began to reveal subtle discrepancies, forgotten alibis, or individuals who had simply disappeared from the area shortly after the girls vanished. Sheriff Thompson's instincts, honed by decades of police work, told him that the answers often lay closer to home than initially believed. He theorized that such a violent act, particularly against the vulnerable Amish community, might have been perpetrated by someone who harbored resentment or a perverse fascination with their isolated lifestyle. This wasn't a random serial killer. This felt more personal, more deeply rooted in the local landscape. The re-interviews were conducted with a new level of scrutiny, taking into account the decade of accumulated knowledge and the horrific implications of the arrowhead. Body language, subtle shifts in tone, forgotten details, everything was fair game. Some individuals who had provided vague or unconfirmed alibis in 1990 were now pressed for greater specifics. Some expressed surprise, others annoyance, that a closed case was being reopened with such intensity. The forensic team, meanwhile, achieved a breakthrough with the arrowhead. Despite the passage of time and the harsh environment, trace amounts of human blood were successfully extracted and, with advanced DNA sequencing techniques, a partial profile was generated. It wasn't enough for a definitive match against a national database, but it was a crucial piece of the puzzle. It confirmed definitively that the arrowhead had been involved in a violent interaction, further solidifying the crime scene theory. The blood profile belonged to a female, consistent with one of the girls, though precise identification was impossible given the degradation. Still, it was proof of struggle, proof of unimaginable terror in their final moments. This discovery solidified the shift in narrative for the public. No longer could anyone cling to the notion of a simple accident. The narrative now was one of abduction, violence, and murder. The community's grief deepened, but it was now accompanied by a fierce demand for justice. The black pickup truck and the arrowhead were the twin pillars of the renewed investigation, driving every decision, every lead. The image of the remote mine entrance, once a nondescript landmark, was now seared into the collective consciousness as the gateway to a horrific crime. The task force began to compile a list of individuals who owned black pickup trucks in the area in 1990, cross-referencing it with anyone who had expressed animosity toward the Amish or who had a history of violent behavior. It was a long, laborious process, sifting through thousands of old vehicle registrations and police reports. A potential suspect began to emerge, a local man named Jedediah Miller, known for his reclusive nature and a history of minor skirmishes with local authorities. He lived in a dilapidated shack not far from the mine entrance and was known to own an older model black pickup truck in 1990. He had been briefly questioned in the initial investigation, but had been dismissed as a local eccentric with no apparent connection. Now, his name resurfaced with a chilling resonance. Miller had a reputation for being fiercely territorial and had, on occasion, voiced anti-Amish sentiments, viewing their lifestyle as an unwelcome intrusion on his isolated existence. He had a violent temper, though his past offenses were largely confined to bar brawls and property disputes. But the key was his familiarity with the area, his reclusive nature, and, most damningly, the consistent recollection of the elderly farmer regarding the black pickup truck. Sheriff Thompson knew that a mere reclusive nature and a black truck weren't enough for an arrest. They needed more concrete evidence, something that directly linked Miller to the mine, to the girls, or to the arrowhead. The partial DNA profile from the arrowhead was their best hope. Could they obtain a DNA sample from Miller, either voluntarily or through legal means, and compare it? The investigative teams began to discreetly observe Miller, noting his routines, his movements, looking for an opportunity to gather evidence. The shadow of the mine and the unspeakable acts it had witnessed was finally beginning to yield its perpetrator. The weight of the past decade, the silent suffering of Jacob and Rebecca, and the collective anguish of the community now pressed heavily on the investigators. The emerging picture was one of meticulous brutality, a calculated act designed to erase 2 young lives from existence. The potential suspect, Jedediah Miller, became the intense focus of the task force. His reclusive lifestyle, which had once made him an easily dismissible figure, now made him an even more formidable and disturbing suspect. His isolation meant fewer witnesses, fewer alibis, and a greater capacity for operating in the shadows. The task force began to construct a detailed timeline of Miller's movements in November 1990, painstakingly cross-referencing it with the girl's last known activities. Every piece of information, however minor, was considered crucial. Did he have any unexplained absences? Had he made any unusual purchases? Had he been seen anywhere near the girl's route on that fateful afternoon? The re-examination of old records, including hunting licenses and gun permits, also came into play. Miller was known to be an avid hunter, and though the arrowhead was ancient, it raised questions about any other weapons he might have possessed and his general comfort with instruments of violence. The challenge of securing a DNA sample from Miller without tipping him off was paramount. The risk of him destroying evidence or fleeing was too great. Undercover surveillance was implemented, with agents discreetly monitoring his activities, hoping to find a discarded item, a cigarette butt, a drinking straw, anything that might contain his DNA. The tension within the task force was palpable. This was their chance, after 10 years of agonizing silence, to bring justice to Sarah and Lizzie. The potential connection to the ancient arrowhead also opened up a bizarre and disturbing line of speculation. Was Miller, with his reclusive nature and his proximity to Native American historical sites, a collector of artifacts? Or did the arrowhead hold some deeper, more symbolic meaning for him, something that could hint at a twisted motive? The questions spiraled, each one drawing the investigators deeper into the dark recesses of a disturbed mind. The re-interviews with those who knew Miller in 1990 yielded a few unsettling anecdotes. Neighbors recalled his sudden bursts of anger, his occasional paranoid ramblings, and a general aura of hostility, particularly towards anyone he perceived as infringing on his isolated existence. The Amish, with their expanding presence in the area, might have been seen by Miller as such an intrusion, a catalyst for his festering resentment. Finally, after weeks of painstaking surveillance, the opportunity arose. Miller, while at a local diner, discarded a used coffee cup and napkin. The items were discreetly collected and rushed to the state forensic lab. The wait for the results was excruciating, a silent vigil that encapsulated a decade of unfulfilled hope and lingering sorrow. When the call finally came, Sheriff Thompson felt a jolt of both vindication and profound sadness. The DNA extracted from the coffee cup and napkin provided a definitive match to the partial DNA profile found on the arrowhead. It was Miller's blood. The significance of this discovery was earth-shattering. It unequivocally linked Jedediah Miller to the violent struggle that had taken place before Sarah and Lizzie's disappearance. The old, forgotten arrowhead, a silent witness for 10 years, had finally spoken. It screamed of a struggle, a confrontation, and the ultimate, horrifying act that led to the girl's demise in the mine. The accidental fall theory was now not just improbable, it was demonstrably false. The arrest of Jedediah Miller, a man who had lived for a decade under the radar, was swift and decisive. The news ripped through Bart Township, a mixture of shock, anger, and a desperate, mournful sense of relief. Relief that the perpetrator had finally been identified, but mournful for the horrific truth it revealed. The interrogation of Miller was a long, arduous process. Initially, he maintained his innocence, stubbornly denying any involvement. But when confronted with the irrefutable DNA evidence from the arrowhead, his facade began to crack. Slowly, reluctantly, and with a chilling lack of remorse, he began to recount the events of that devastating November afternoon. His motive, as twisted as it was, emerged from a murky brew of resentment, a deep-seated paranoia about outsiders, and a perceived encroachment on his property. He claimed that the girl's buggy had veered onto his property, an accusation that was later disproven by mapping their known route, and that he had confronted them. An argument ensued, escalating into a violent struggle. He claimed one of the girls, presumably Sarah, had picked up the ancient arrowhead he kept on his porch as a display piece and attempted to defend herself, cutting him in the process. This explained his blood on the arrowhead. In a fit of rage, he then assaulted them, forcing them back into their buggy, and in a chilling act of methodical cruelty, pushed the entire buggy, with the terrified girls still inside, into the deep, forgotten mine shaft near his property. He had intended to erase them completely, to make them vanish without a trace. The vastness of the mine, he believed, would swallow his crime whole. The sheer brutality of his actions, and his callous disregard for human life, sent a shiver down the spine of even the most hardened investigators. The trial that followed was a public spectacle, the culmination of a decade of heartache and unanswered questions. Jacob and Rebecca, their faces etched with grief, sat stoically through the harrowing testimony, forced to relive the unimaginable. Miller, unwavering in his coldness, was ultimately convicted on 2 counts of murder. The judge, in delivering the sentence, spoke of the profound evil of his actions, the desecration of innocence, and the decade of suffering he had inflicted upon a grieving family and a shattered community. Justice, though long delayed, had finally been served. But for Sarah and Lizzie, and for those who loved them, the scars of that dark November afternoon would forever remain, a permanent reminder of the fragile line between peace and unspeakable violence, and the enduring power of a hidden truth finally brought to light by the silent testament of an ancient arrowhead.